A community theater actor confessed to double murder during police interrogation, admitting he executed an Afghanistan war veteran and an innocent college student to fund his lavish wedding. But months of meticulous planning would collapse in a single moment when detectives caught him in a lie that only the killer could have known. Daniel Wozniak stood on stage night after night, delivering perfectly rehearsed lines to captivated audiences in Costa Mesa, California. His performance in the musical Nine earned applause and admiration from theatergoers who saw him as a talented, charismatic young man pursuing his passion for the arts. But behind the curtain, this 26-year-old actor was rehearsing for the most horrific performance of his life. In May 2010, mounting debt and desperation drove Wozniak to commit acts so calculated and brutal that even seasoned detectives would struggle to comprehend the depth of his cruelty. His targets were people who trusted him completely. Samuel Herr, a 26-year-old Afghanistan war veteran who had saved $62,000 from his combat pay, and Julie Kibuishi, a 23-year-old dance student whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. What followed was a carefully orchestrated plan that would span months of preparation, involve dismemberment and deception, and ultimately unravel when Wozniak could not resist putting on one final performance for police investigators. His confession would shock even experienced homicide detectives, revealing a level of premeditation and callousness that defied explanation. The case would expose how financial desperation can transform an ordinary person into a cold-blooded killer, how trust can become a weapon, and how the pursuit of a perfect life can lead to the most imperfect crimes imaginable. For the families of Samuel Herr and Julie Kibuishi, it would mean a journey through unimaginable grief, years of legal proceedings, and ultimately a reckoning with the reality that someone they knew and trusted had destroyed their worlds for nothing more than money. This is the true account of how a theater actor's final performance became a chilling confession to double murder, and how his desperate attempt to fund a dream wedding became a nightmare that would haunt two families forever. Costa Mesa, California, in the spring of 2010, was a thriving community where young people came to pursue their dreams and build their futures. The city offered a blend of suburban comfort and urban opportunity, with community theaters, colleges, and military facilities creating a diverse landscape where different worlds intersected in unexpected ways. In this setting lived three young adults whose paths would cross with devastating consequences. Samuel Herr represented the best of American military service and determination. At 26, he had already served 15 months in Afghanistan as a private first class, earning the respect of his fellow soldiers and the deep pride of his parents, Steve and Raquel Herr. When Samuel returned home in July 2009, he carried with him not only the discipline and courage that military service instills, but also a substantial savings account built from his combat pay. Unlike many veterans who struggle with the transition to civilian life, Samuel embraced his new chapter with enthusiasm. He enrolled at Orange Coast College, throwing himself into his studies with the same dedication he had shown in the military. His professors and classmates knew him as a responsible, hard-working student who took his education seriously. Despite being older than many of his peers, Samuel never acted as though his military experience made him superior to others. Instead, he was known for his humility, his willingness to help fellow students, and his genuine desire to build a meaningful civilian career. Samuel had saved approximately $62,000 during his military service, a substantial sum that represented years of careful financial planning and the unique opportunity that combat pay provided. This money was not frivolously spent or carelessly displayed. Samuel was private about his finances, sharing this information only with those closest to him. To Samuel, this money represented security, opportunity, and the foundation for whatever future he chose to build. Julie Kibuishi embodied the artistic spirit and academic dedication that Costa Mesa fostered in its young residents. At 23, she was a talented dancer and dedicated student who balanced her passion for performance with her commitment to education. Julie attended Orange Coast College, where she excelled in her studies and became known among her classmates as someone who could be counted on for help and support. Her relationship with Samuel was built on mutual respect and shared academic goals. Julie served as Samuel's tutor, helping him navigate the challenges of returning to school after military service. Their friendship was genuine and supportive, with both families confirming that their connection was platonic and based on their shared commitment to education. Julie's parents, June and Masa Kibuishi, had raised their daughter to be kind, generous and trusting, qualities that made her beloved by friends and family, but would ultimately make her vulnerable to betrayal. Julie was known for her distinctive style and positive energy. Whether she was performing on stage, studying with classmates, or simply spending time with friends, She brought a brightness that others remembered long after encountering her. Her commitment to helping other students, particularly veterans like Samuel, who were transitioning back to civilian life, demonstrated the compassion and generosity that defined her character. Daniel Wozniak appeared to be another young person pursuing his dreams in Costa Mesa's vibrant community. At 26, he was actively involved in local theater productions, demonstrating what seemed to be genuine talent and passion for performance. His engagement to Rachel Buffett, a fellow community theater actress, painted a picture of a couple united by their shared love of the arts and their dreams of building a life together. However, beneath this appealing exterior, Wozniak was struggling with serious financial problems that he had hidden from most people in his life. He was unemployed, behind on rent, and facing eviction from the apartment he shared with Rachel in the same complex where Samuel Herr lived. The contrast between his public persona as a successful, engaged theater actor and his private reality as someone drowning in debt created a pressure that was building toward a catastrophic release. The apartment complex where these three young people lived became the setting for their intersecting lives, and ultimately the launching point for tragedy. Samuel, Julie, and Daniel all moved through the same spaces, attended the same social gatherings, and developed what appeared to be genuine friendships. The proximity of their living situations meant that they knew details about each other's lives, routines, and circumstances that would later prove crucial to the crimes that followed. In this environment of trust and familiarity, Daniel Wozniak began to plan murders that would shock the Costa Mesa community and reveal the dangerous potential that can lurk behind even the most ordinary facades. By early 2010, Daniel Wozniak's carefully constructed public image was crumbling under the weight of mounting financial pressures that he had managed to hide from most people in his life. Behind his confident performances on stage and his enthusiastic planning for his upcoming wedding to Rachel Buffett, Wozniak was drowning in debt and facing the imminent collapse of everything he had worked to build. The eviction notice arrived like a countdown to disaster. Wozniak and Rachel were behind on rent for their apartment in the same complex where Samuel Herr lived, and their landlord had finally lost patience with their excuses and promises. The legal document gave them a specific deadline to either pay what they owed or vacate the premises, and Wozniak knew he had neither the money to catch up on rent nor the resources to find alternative housing. Employment had become increasingly elusive for both Wozniak and Rachel. The economic challenges of pursuing careers in community theater meant that steady, well-paying work was difficult to find, and both were struggling to balance their artistic ambitions with the practical necessity of earning enough money to survive. Wozniak's lack of a regular income had created a downward spiral of financial problems that seemed to compound with each passing month. The pressure was intensified by Wozniak's commitment to his upcoming wedding and honeymoon with Rachel. Rather than scaling back their plans to match their financial reality, Wozniak had become obsessed with maintaining the appearance of success and providing Rachel with the elaborate celebration he believed she deserved. He had made promises about their wedding and honeymoon that he could not keep without finding a substantial amount of money quickly. This financial desperation created a dangerous mindset in which normal moral boundaries began to dissolve. Wozniak started to view his circumstances not as the result of his own choices and circumstances, but as problems that could be solved through other means. The idea of earning money through legitimate work seemed too slow and uncertain, while the presence of Samuel Herr in his apartment complex offered what appeared to be a solution to all his problems. Samuel's openness about his military savings proved to be a fatal mistake in judgment. During casual conversations with neighbors and friends, Samuel had mentioned his $62,000 nest egg, probably viewing this information as harmless context for his financial security and future plans. To most people, this information was simply an interesting detail about Samuel's successful military service and careful financial planning. For Daniel Wozniak, however, learning about Samuel's savings triggered a transformation from desperate debtor to calculating predator. The knowledge that such a substantial amount of money was so close and accessible began to consume his thinking. Rather than seeing Samuel as a friend and neighbor who had earned his financial security through military service and careful planning, Wozniak began to view him as an opportunity to solve all his financial problems at once. The community theater production of Nine became an ironic backdrop to Wozniak's descent into criminal planning. Night after night, he stood on stage delivering lines about love, ambition, and the choices that define human character, while privately developing a plan to commit murder for money. The discipline and creativity that made him an effective actor were now being channeled into plotting crimes of unprecedented brutality and deception. Rachel Buffett, focused on their upcoming wedding and unaware of the depth of their financial crisis, continued to plan and dream about their future together. Her trust in Daniel and her excitement about their wedding made her an unknowing participant in the pressure that was driving him toward violence. The contrast between her innocent expectations and his developing murderous plans created an additional layer of deception that Wozniak had to maintain while finalizing his criminal scheme. During these months of financial pressure and criminal planning, Wozniak maintained his public persona with remarkable skill. Friends, neighbors, and fellow theater actors continued to see him as the same charismatic, talented young man they had always known. His ability to compartmentalize his desperation and his developing criminal plans demonstrated a capacity for deception that would later prove crucial to understanding the full scope of his crimes. The transformation from desperate young man to calculating killer did not happen overnight, but rather through a gradual process of moral compromise and criminal rationalization that culminated in a plan of shocking brutality and complexity. May 21, 2010, began as an ordinary Friday for Samuel Herr, but it would end with his brutal murder at the hands of someone he considered a friend and neighbor. The plan that Daniel Wozniak had developed over months of careful consideration was about to be put into action, transforming him from a desperate debtor into a cold-blooded killer. The Joint Forces training base in Los Alamitos provided the perfect setting for Wozniak's crime. The military facility, with its theater space and relative isolation, offered both familiarity and privacy that would be essential to his plan. Wozniak's access to this location, combined with his knowledge of Samuel's military background and trusting nature, created the opportunity he had been waiting for. The deception began with a simple request for help. Wozniak approached Samuel with a story about needing assistance moving some supplies in the theater at the military base. To Samuel, this request seemed perfectly reasonable coming from someone he knew and trusted. His military training had instilled in him a willingness to help others, and his friendship with Wozniak made the request seem like a natural extension of their neighborly relationship. Samuel agreed to help without suspicion or hesitation. His decision to accompany Wozniak to the theater was based on trust, friendship, and his own generous nature. There was no reason for him to suspect that his neighbor had spent months planning his murder, or that the simple request for help was actually a carefully constructed trap designed to get him into an isolated location where he could be killed without witnesses. When they arrived at the theater, Wozniak continued his performance of normalcy, chatting with Samuel and maintaining the pretense that they were there for legitimate purposes. The theater space, with its elevated areas and storage spaces, provided the perfect environment for what Wozniak had planned. His familiarity with the location meant that he knew exactly where to position Samuel and how to execute his plan with minimal risk of discovery. The moment of betrayal came with shocking suddenness. According to Wozniak's later confession to police, he told Samuel, "You need to bend down and help me lift this thing up." When Samuel complied, positioning himself in the vulnerable posture that Wozniak had orchestrated, the attack began. When he bent down, I grabbed the gun, and I shot him, Wozniak would later tell investigators with chilling matter-of-factness. The first gunshot did not kill Samuel immediately, creating a horrific situation that revealed the depth of Wozniak's commitment to his crime. Samuel, wounded and confused, was still conscious and trying to understand what had happened to him. According to Wozniak's confession, Samuel said, "I need help. Something hit me. It felt like an electric shock." These words, spoken by a dying man who still did not fully comprehend that his trusted friend had shot him, demonstrated the complete betrayal of trust that was at the heart of this crime. Rather than stopping, helping, or showing any mercy for the man he had just shot, Wozniak made the calculated decision to finish what he had started. "I reloaded and fired again," he would later tell police, describing the second shot that ended Samuel's life. This deliberate action to reload and fire a second shot demonstrated that Samuel's murder was not the result of a moment of panic or a crime of passion, but rather the execution of a premeditated plan to kill. The horror of Samuel's murder was compounded by what Wozniak did next. Rather than fleeing the scene or attempting to cover up his crime, he proceeded with the most gruesome aspect of his plan, dismembering Samuel's body. Using tools he had apparently prepared in advance, Wozniak decapitated Samuel and removed his hands, taking these body parts to dispose of them separately, while leaving Samuel's torso in the theater attic. The dismemberment served multiple purposes in Wozniak's criminal plan. By separating Samuel's head and hands from his torso, Wozniak was making identification more difficult and creating additional opportunities to dispose of evidence. The calculated nature of this mutilation demonstrated a level of planning and cold-bloodedness that even experienced homicide investigators would find shocking. After committing murder and dismembering Samuel's body, Wozniak returned to his normal life with remarkable composure. That same evening, he appeared on stage in the community theater production of Nine, delivering his lines and interacting with the audience as though nothing had happened. His ability to perform just hours after committing such a brutal crime demonstrated either exceptional acting skills or a level of psychological detachment that suggested serious mental pathology. The contrast between Wozniak's stage performance that evening and the brutal reality of what he had done just hours earlier created a surreal juxtaposition that would later become one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. While audiences applauded his artistic talents, Samuel Herr's dismembered body lay hidden in a theater attic, and Wozniak's criminal plan was only half complete. Samuel's murder represented not just the end of a promising young life, but the beginning of a complex web of deception and additional violence that would ultimately claim a second innocent victim and shatter multiple families forever. With Samuel Herr dead and dismembered, Daniel Wozniak faced a critical challenge: how to avoid suspicion while gaining access to Samuel's bank account and the $62,000 that had motivated the murder. His solution involved a second killing that was even more calculating and cold-blooded than the first, targeting an innocent young woman whose only crime was caring enough about Samuel to help him with his studies. Julie Kibuishi had no way of knowing that the text messages she received on the evening of May 21st were not coming from her friend Samuel, but from his killer. Wozniak, now in possession of Samuel's cell phone, began implementing the second phase of his plan, luring Julie to Samuel's apartment under false pretenses so that he could kill her and frame Samuel for her murder. The text messages appeared to come from Samuel and suggested that he needed to see Julie at his apartment. Given their established relationship as friends and study partners, this request would not have seemed unusual or suspicious to Julie. She had been to Samuel's apartment before, trusted him completely, and had no reason to suspect that anything was wrong. Her willingness to help Samuel, which had made her such a valued friend and tutor, now made her vulnerable to Wozniak's deadly deception. Julie arrived at Samuel's apartment wearing a tiara, having just come from her brother's house where she had been spending time with family. This detail, which Wozniak would later recount to police, added a particularly tragic dimension to her murder. The tiara represented joy, celebration, and family connection, everything that was about to be destroyed by Wozniak's calculated violence. When Julie arrived at the apartment, Wozniak was waiting for her. He had already prepared the scene for what he planned to do, and he used his acting skills to maintain the deception that would keep Julie unsuspecting until the final moment. According to his later confession, he told Julie that Samuel had called him and was going through some stuff, and that he had a key to let them into the apartment. Once inside the apartment, Wozniak continued his performance of concern and normalcy. He directed Julie's attention to Samuel's bed, claiming that Samuel had asked him to show her something there. "Did you see this in Sam's bed?" he asked, encouraging her to lean over and look closely. "Lean over, look at it right there." When Julie complied with this request, positioning herself exactly where Wozniak wanted her, he executed her with the same cold calculation he had used to kill Samuel. "When she was leaned over, I put 2 bullets in the back of her head," he would later confess to police. The brutality of shooting an unsuspecting young woman in the back of the head while she was trying to help demonstrated a level of cruelty that shocked even seasoned investigators. Julie's murder was not driven by the same financial motivation that had led to Samuel's killing. Instead, she was murdered solely to serve as a cover for Wozniak's first crime. By killing Julie in Samuel's apartment and staging the scene to suggest a sexual assault, Wozniak hoped to create a narrative in which Samuel had killed Julie and then fled, taking his money with him. This would explain both Samuel's disappearance and his emptied bank account, while directing suspicion away from Wozniak. The staging of the crime scene revealed the calculated nature of Wozniak's planning and his willingness to desecrate Julie's body to serve his deceptive purposes. Hours after killing Julie, Wozniak returned to the apartment and used scissors to cut her pants, pulling them down and positioning her body to suggest sexual assault. He also wrote a disturbing message on the back of her sweatshirt, "Phew, she's all yours," designed to make investigators believe that Samuel had committed the crime and was taunting authorities. This posthumous violation of Julie's body demonstrated a level of depravity that went beyond simple murder. Wozniak was willing to destroy not only Julie's life, but also her dignity and her family's memory of her, all to serve his selfish purposes. The fact that he returned to manipulate her body hours after the murder showed that this was not a crime of passion, but a carefully planned deception that he was willing to maintain regardless of the additional trauma it would cause. The timing of Julie's murder, coming just hours after Wozniak's evening performance in Nine, created another disturbing juxtaposition between his public persona and his private crimes. He had moved seamlessly from entertaining audiences on stage to committing brutal murder, then back to normal life, demonstrating an ability to compartmentalize that suggested either exceptional acting ability or serious psychological pathology. Julie's murder completed the foundation of Wozniak's plan, but it also doubled his legal exposure and created additional evidence that would ultimately lead to his downfall. By killing 2 people instead of 1, Wozniak had dramatically increased the complexity of his crimes and the number of ways that his plan could unravel. For Julie's family, her murder represented not just the loss of a beloved daughter, but also the violation of everything she had stood for. Her generosity, trust, and willingness to help others had been turned against her by someone who saw her only as an obstacle to overcome in pursuit of money. Saturday, May 22, 2010, began with a father's concern and ended with the discovery of a brutal crime that would shock the Costa Mesa community and launch one of the most complex murder investigations in Orange County history. Steve Herr's decision to check on his son Samuel would reveal not only Julie Kibuishi's body, but also the beginning of a carefully constructed deception designed to frame his son for murder. Steve Herr had planned to spend time with Samuel that Saturday, but when his son failed to appear for their scheduled visit and did not respond to phone calls, fatherly concern prompted him to use his key to enter Samuel's apartment. What he found there would haunt him for the rest of his life and fundamentally change his understanding of the evil that ordinary people can be capable of committing. Then I went into the bedroom. I saw a woman, Steve Herr would later recount. When I touched her, she was cold. I could see she was dead, so obviously I was stunned. What happened? Initially, you say, what did he do? I'm thinking, Sam wouldn't do that. The discovery of Julie Kibuishi's body in his son's bedroom created an immediate crisis of understanding for Steve Herr, who knew his son's character but was confronted with evidence that seemed to suggest the impossible. The crime scene that police encountered when they responded to Steve Herr's call appeared to support a narrative of sexual assault and murder, followed by flight. Julie's body was positioned against Samuel's bed, her pants had been cut and pulled down, and the disturbing message written on her sweatshirt suggested that whoever had killed her was taunting authorities. Samuel's passport, identification, wallet and vehicle were all missing, creating the impression that he had fled after committing the crime. Written on the back of her sweatshirt was, "F you, she's all yours." "So that looks like a sexual assault," explained Matt Murphy, the former senior deputy district attorney, who would later prosecute the case. The staging was convincing enough that investigators initially focused their efforts on locating Samuel as their primary suspect, launching a manhunt for a man who was already dead. The autopsy of Julie's body revealed details that both supported and contradicted the apparent narrative of the crime scene. Julie had indeed been shot twice in the head, confirming the cause of death, but she had not been sexually assaulted despite the positioning of her body and clothing. More significantly, the evidence showed that her pants had remained on for several hours after her death, indicating that someone had returned to the scene later to stage the sexual assault scenario. It means that somebody had come back after she had been dead for several hours, staged the scene and cut her jeans off, Murphy explained. This soon morphed into something far more diabolical. This revelation transformed the investigation from a straightforward case of sexual assault and murder to something much more complex and calculated. As police worked to locate Samuel Herr, they began interviewing people who knew both him and Julie. The consistent picture that emerged was of a platonic friendship based on tutoring and mutual respect, not a romantic relationship that might have gone wrong. Samuel's family and friends adamantly insisted that he was not capable of the crime he appeared to have committed, but the physical evidence seemed to contradict their faith in his character. The investigation took a significant turn when unusual charges began appearing on Samuel's bank account. On Saturday, May 22nd, the same day Julie's body was discovered, $400 was withdrawn from Samuel's account at an ATM in Long Beach, California. The following day, another $500 was taken out, and there was also a charge for pizza. These transactions provided the first concrete leads in what had otherwise been a frustrating search for a missing suspect. The ATM surveillance footage revealed a crucial detail. The person using Samuel's card was not Samuel Herr. At least 2 ATMs it appeared to be the same young man. It was not Samuel Herr, Murphy noted. This discovery meant that either Samuel had given someone else access to his accounts, or someone had gained unauthorized access to his financial resources. Police traced the address associated with the pizza purchase to a home in Long Beach, where they found a 16-year-old boy in possession of Samuel's ATM card. When questioned, The teenager claimed that he had received the card from his friend, Daniel Wozniak. This was the first time Wozniak's name had come up in connection with the crimes, and it immediately made him a person of interest in the investigation. The revelation that Wozniak was connected to Samuel's missing ATM card created a new direction for the investigation, but it did not immediately resolve the central questions about Samuel's whereabouts or his apparent involvement in Julie's murder. At this point, investigators still believed that Samuel had killed Julie and fled, and they were trying to understand Wozniak's role in helping him access money while on the run. The complexity of the evidence and the multiple layers of deception that Wozniak had built into his plan meant that investigators were initially focused on the wrong narrative, exactly as Wozniak had intended. However, the trail of financial evidence was beginning to lead them toward the truth, setting up the confrontation that would ultimately expose the full scope of Wozniak's crimes. May 26, 2010, marked the beginning of Daniel Wozniak's final and most crucial performance, though this time his audience was not theater patrons but homicide detectives who were trained to recognize deception and manipulation. The interrogation that followed would reveal not only Wozniak's crimes but also his remarkable ability to lie convincingly under pressure, right up until the moment when his own words exposed him as the killer. When police brought Wozniak in for questioning, he arrived with the same confidence and charisma that had made him successful on stage. He understood that he was suspected of helping Samuel Herr access money while on the run, but he believed he could control the narrative and direct suspicion away from himself through careful performance and strategic deception. Wozniak's first strategy was to admit to a lesser crime while denying involvement in the murders. He acknowledged that he had manipulated 17-year-old Wesley Freilich into making withdrawals from Samuel's bank account, positioning himself as someone who had helped a friend in trouble rather than someone who had committed murder for money. He asked if it was illegal. "I said no, don't worry," Wozniak told investigators. "That was a lie." This partial admission was designed to establish Wozniak's credibility by showing his willingness to confess to wrongdoing, while simultaneously providing an explanation for the financial evidence that connected him to the case. It was a calculated risk that demonstrated both his intelligence and his overconfidence in his ability to manipulate the investigation. To support his story of helping Samuel escape, Wozniak created an elaborate narrative about Samuel confessing to Julie's murder. According to this fabricated account, Samuel had appeared at Wozniak's door on the night of the murder, distraught and confessing to having killed Julie in a fit of rage. "I'm like, hey man, what's going on? Is everything good?" Samuel's like, "Not good. I did something bad," Wozniak told detectives. "I'm like, what did you do?" He's like, "There's a dead body in my apartment. I shot somebody. I was not happy about it. It was a fit of rage." This story served multiple purposes in Wozniak's deception. It explained how he knew about Julie's murder, provided a motive for helping Samuel access money, and maintained the narrative that Samuel was the killer who had fled. The detail and emotion that Wozniak brought to this fabricated confession demonstrated his skills as an actor and his understanding of how to make lies sound convincing. As the interrogation continued, detectives pressed Wozniak for more details about his involvement and his knowledge of the crime. When they asked him to provide a saliva sample for DNA testing, Wozniak recognized that his carefully constructed story was about to collapse. Fearing that his DNA might be found at the crime scene, he made a crucial decision to change his story and admit to having been in Samuel's apartment after Julie was killed. "I saw the goddamn body. Is that what you want to hear? I was right over the body," Wozniak told police, abandoning his previous denial of direct involvement. "I didn't touch her. I didn't do anything. I saw 2 gunshots in her head." This admission was designed to explain any potential DNA evidence while still maintaining his innocence of the actual murder. However, this admission contained a fatal error that exposed Wozniak as the killer. When he mentioned seeing 2 gunshot wounds, Lieutenant Ed Everett immediately recognized the significance of this detail. "Because when we were in the apartment, we all looked, and it was only 1 gunshot wound visible to our eyes. And then when he mentioned he saw 2 gunshot wounds, I said, well, he was there when she was shot," Everett explained. "He was there when she was killed." The autopsy would later confirm that Julie had indeed been shot twice in the head, but only 1 wound was visible to investigators at the crime scene. The only way Wozniak could have known about the second gunshot wound was if he had been present when Julie was killed, making him either the murderer or a witness to the murder. This moment represented the collapse of Wozniak's carefully planned deception. Despite months of preparation and his considerable skills as an actor, he had been caught in a lie that only the killer could have told. His story kept changing, Everett noted, I think he thought that his acting ability was going to carry him through this performance, so to speak, and it wasn't doing it. The interrogation revealed not only Wozniak's guilt, but also his psychology. He had approached the questioning as another performance opportunity, believing that he could use his theatrical skills to convince investigators of his innocence. His willingness to admit to helping a murderer while denying being the murderer himself showed both his intelligence and his fundamental miscalculation about how criminal investigations work. The fact that Wozniak's own words ultimately exposed him as the killer added a layer of irony to his downfall. The same verbal skills that had made him an effective actor became the tools of his own destruction when he provided information that only the murderer could have known. This interrogation set the stage for the final phase of Wozniak's confession, when the collapse of his deception would force him to admit not only to Julie's murder, but also to the killing and dismemberment of Samuel Herr. After hours of interrogation and increasingly desperate attempts to maintain his deception, Daniel Wozniak found himself in a jail cell, making what he believed was a private phone call to his fiancée Rachel Buffett. What he did not anticipate was that this conversation would provide the final push that would compel him to abandon his lies and confess to the brutal murders that had shocked the Costa Mesa community. The recorded jailhouse phone call between Wozniak and Buffett revealed the complexity of their relationship and the extent to which his crimes had trapped both of them in a web of deception and legal jeopardy. During this conversation, Buffett informed Wozniak that she had spoken with his brother Tim Wozniak earlier in the day, and that Tim had confessed to being in possession of incriminating evidence that Daniel had given him before going to the police station. The evidence that Tim Wozniak had been holding included the murder weapon and other materials that could directly connect Daniel to the crimes. Daniel had apparently anticipated the possibility of being questioned and had tried to remove incriminating evidence from his possession. But this attempt to avoid detection had now become another form of evidence against him. On the recording of the phone call, Wozniak's desperation became evident as he begged Buffett not to tell police about the evidence. "I'm doomed," he told her, finally acknowledging that his careful plan had collapsed and that he faced the prospect of being charged with murder. This moment of honesty represented the first crack in the facade that he had maintained throughout months of planning and hours of interrogation. Buffett's response revealed both her awareness of their precarious situation and her ultimate decision to prioritize truth over loyalty. She reminded Wozniak that their conversation was being recorded and that continuing to hide evidence would only make their situation worse. She told him that she was going to call detectives as soon as she got off the phone with him, effectively ending any hope he might have had of maintaining his deception. And that's when he decides to let the jailer know. "Hey, I need to speak to the detectives," Costa Mesa Police Detective Jose Morales explained. The collapse of Wozniak's final hope for avoiding detection had finally forced him to confront the reality that his only option was to confess and hope for some form of mercy or understanding. After 14 hours at the police station, Wozniak finally requested to speak with detectives again, this time ready to abandon the elaborate lies he had constructed and admit to the full scope of his crimes. The confession that followed was chilling in its matter-of-fact tone and shocking in its revelation of premeditated violence against two innocent people. "I'm crazy and I did it," Wozniak told police in his recorded confession. "I killed Julie and I killed Sam." These words represented not only an admission of guilt, but also the collapse of months of planning and deception. The man who had believed he could commit the perfect crime and manipulate investigators through his acting skills was finally confronting the reality of what he had done. Wozniak's confession revealed the calculated nature of Samuel's murder, beginning with the deception used to lure him to the theater, and continuing through the brutal killing and dismemberment. "I said, 'You need to bend down and help me lift this thing up.' When he bent down, I grabbed the gun, and I shot him," Wozniak explained, describing the moment when he had betrayed Samuel's trust and friendship. The confession also revealed Samuel's final moments and his inability to comprehend what was happening to him. He said, "I need help. Something hit me. It felt like an electric shock," Wozniak recounted. "I reloaded and fired again." This detail demonstrated not only the brutality of the crime, but also Samuel's continued trust in Wozniak even as he was dying, not understanding that his friend had become his killer. Wozniak described the dismemberment of Samuel's body with the same matter-of-fact tone, explaining how he had decapitated Samuel and removed his hands before disposing of some body parts in El Dorado Park in Long Beach, California. The casual way he discussed these gruesome details shocked investigators and revealed the psychological distance he had created between himself and his actions. The confession then turned to Julie's murder, which Wozniak described as a calculated decision to cover up Samuel's killing. He recounted how he had used Samuel's phone to lure Julie to the apartment, how he had deceived her into positioning herself for execution, and how he had shot her twice in the back of the head while she was trying to help. Julie was wearing like a crown tiara. She had just come from her brother's, and I said Sam just called me and he was going through some stuff. She said, yeah, me too. I said, well, I have a key. Let's go in, Wozniak told police. I said, oh, by the way, did you see this in Sam's bed? Lean over, look at it right there. When she was leaned over, I put 2 bullets in the back of her head. This detailed confession provided investigators with not only admissions of guilt, but also information about the location of evidence and Samuel's remains. It also revealed the full scope of Wozniak's deception and the calculated nature of crimes that had initially appeared to be a sexual assault followed by flight. The transformation from confident performer to confessed killer represented the complete collapse of Wozniak's carefully constructed plan and the end of his belief that he could control the narrative of his crimes through deception and manipulation. Daniel Wozniak's confession opened the door to a complex legal process that would span more than 5 years and ultimately result in one of Orange County's most closely watched death penalty cases. The recovery of physical evidence, the impact on the families of the victims, and the broader legal implications of the case would extend far beyond the initial confessions, creating a prolonged ordeal for everyone involved. Following Wozniak's confession, investigators were able to locate and recover Samuel Herr's dismembered remains from El Dorado Nature Center in Long Beach, where Wozniak had disposed of his head and hands. The discovery of these body parts confirmed the gruesome details of Wozniak's confession and provided closure for Samuel's family, who had spent days not knowing whether their son was alive or dead. The torso of Samuel's body was found in the attic of the theater where Wozniak had committed the murder, exactly as he had described in his confession. The recovery of these remains allowed for a complete autopsy and confirmed the cause of death, while also providing additional physical evidence to support the prosecution's case. A search of Wozniak's parents' home revealed a backpack containing Samuel's bloody clothes, wallet, identification, and other personal items that Wozniak had taken from the crime scene. This evidence not only corroborated his confession, but also demonstrated the calculated nature of his planning, as he had apparently prepared a place to store incriminating evidence. Perhaps most revealing was the examination of Wozniak's computer, which provided investigators with a disturbing window into his mindset and planning process. You can literally read his mind from Google, prosecutor Matt Murphy explained. So it would literally be from how do I accomplish this killing, to bitchin' honeymoon ideas. So it's sick. The computer searches revealed the extent to which Wozniak had researched methods of committing murder while simultaneously planning his wedding and honeymoon. The legal proceedings were complicated by defense attorney Scott Sanders's allegations of prosecutorial misconduct related to the use of jailhouse informants. Sanders filed extensive motions alleging that the Orange County District Attorney's Office and Sheriff's Department had systematically violated defendants' rights through improper use of informants in jail settings. While these allegations did not specifically relate to evidence in the Wozniak case, they contributed to significant delays in bringing the case to trial. After more than 5 years of legal proceedings, Daniel Wozniak finally went to trial in December 2015. The prosecution, led by Matt Murphy, presented a comprehensive case that included Wozniak's recorded confessions, physical evidence, computer searches, and testimony from investigators and forensic experts. The defense faced the challenge of representing a client who had confessed to 2 brutal murders while trying to argue for a sentence less than death. On December 16, 2015, a jury found Daniel Wozniak guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. The verdict was hardly surprising given the strength of the evidence and Wozniak's own confessions, but it represented an important step toward justice for the families of Samuel Herr and Julie Kibuishi. The penalty phase of the trial focused on whether Wozniak should receive the death penalty or life in prison without the possibility of parole. Prosecutor Matt Murphy argued that the calculated nature of the crimes, the lack of remorse shown by Wozniak, and his disregard for the suffering of the victims' families warranted the ultimate punishment. The defense attempted to present mitigating factors that might convince the jury to spare Wozniak's life. On January 11, 2016, the jury recommended the death penalty for Daniel Wozniak. Superior Court Judge John Conley formally sentenced Wozniak to death on September 23, 2016, concluding the trial phase of a case that had consumed years of legal proceedings and caused immeasurable suffering to multiple families. The sentencing hearing provided an opportunity for the families of Samuel Herr and Julie Kibuishi to confront Wozniak directly and express the impact his crimes had had on their lives. Steve Herr, Samuel's father, told Wozniak, "My only regret is that this state won't let me kill this coward myself." June Kibuishi, Julie's mother, addressed Wozniak directly. "You took my beautiful, caring, loving daughter's precious life to cover up your heinous and planned crime. Did I ever see any remorse? No, not even once." The case against Rachel Buffett, Wozniak's former fiancée, proceeded separately and resulted in her conviction on 2 counts of being an accessory after the fact. She was accused of lying to investigators to help protect Wozniak, and in November 2018, she was sentenced to 32 months in jail. She was released sometime in 2019 after serving her sentence minus time served and good behavior credits. California Governor Gavin Newsom's declaration of a moratorium on capital punishment in 2019 meant that Wozniak and more than 700 other death row inmates were not facing execution. This development greatly upset the families of Wozniak's victims, who had endured years of legal proceedings with the expectation that he would ultimately be executed for his crimes. Daniel Wozniak remains incarcerated on death row, where he will likely spend the rest of his life regardless of whether California ever resumes executions. His crimes continue to serve as a stark reminder of how financial desperation and moral corruption can transform an ordinary person into a brutal killer, and how the pursuit of easy money can lead to consequences far worse than the problems it was intended to solve. The Daniel Wozniak case stands as a chilling reminder that the most dangerous predators often wear familiar faces and hide behind masks of normalcy and charm. What makes this case particularly disturbing is not just the brutality of the crimes, but the calculated deception that allowed Wozniak to maintain relationships with his victims while planning their murders over a period of months. The psychological profile that emerges from this case reveals someone who possessed the intelligence and creativity to plan complex crimes, the acting skills to deceive investigators for hours, and the emotional detachment necessary to dismember a friend's body and then perform on stage the same evening. This combination of traits created a uniquely dangerous individual who was able to exploit the trust and generosity of people who considered him a friend. For Samuel Herr and Julie Kibuishi, their greatest strengths became their fatal weaknesses. Samuel's openness about his financial success, generosity in helping neighbors, and trust in people he considered friends created the opportunity that Wozniak exploited. Julie's compassion for fellow students, willingness to help others, and trust in people she knew made her vulnerable to the deception that led to her death. The case demonstrates how quickly ordinary financial problems can escalate into desperate measures when combined with moral corruption and a willingness to view other people as obstacles rather than human beings. Wozniak's transformation from struggling actor to double murderer illustrates the dangerous potential that exists when someone decides that their problems justify harming others. Perhaps most importantly, this case serves as a reminder that evil can exist in the most ordinary places, and that the people closest to us may be capable of betrayal beyond our imagination. The fact that Wozniak was able to maintain normal relationships and continue his daily activities while planning and committing murder should serve as a warning about the importance of recognizing warning signs and trusting our instincts when something feels wrong. The families of Samuel Herr and Julie Kibuishi have shown remarkable courage in their pursuit of justice and their efforts to ensure that their loved ones are remembered for who they were, not just how they died. Their strength in the face of unimaginable loss serves as an inspiration and a reminder that love and memory can survive even the most brutal attempts to destroy them. If you found this case as shocking as we did, make sure to subscribe to Criminal Mind Cortex for more incredible true crime cases that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the people around you. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest investigations into the most mind-bending cases from around the world, where we explore not just what happened, but what we can learn from these tragic events to protect ourselves and our loved ones.